You don't have to leave right away. You can stay. You can go shop and spend some money in our restaurants too. But I do appreciate everyone coming, and it's been a really good conference. When we talk about efficiencies and what we're planning on doing with regards to the program that's been implemented by the state, we sort of had to go back and start and think about what Erie County government is, who we work with, where we are today, and where we were in the past. And we feel like we're a little bit more under the gun because of the current condition of Erie County as was it in the past with coming up with efficiencies. By a show of hands, how many counties here can say that their average county taxpayer pays less in taxes in 2014 than they did in 1990? That's a problem for Erie County because, in effect, our tax rate was almost double in 1990, and even with the lower assessed value of properties back then, the average homeowner pays less today in 2014 for their county taxes than they did in 1990 because of tax reductions over the years, the dropping of the size of government. Erie County government is roughly 30% less in size than it was in 1990. The tax rate now is $5.03 as compared to when it was $9.50. So when we look at the program of efficiencies, we have to look and say, well, okay, Erie County government's not going to cut its way out of these issues, and we're not going to be able to just turn over services because we're really bare bones. I was talking with the county executives at the table earlier, and we were commenting on how in Erie County, some of the other counties, 90%, of course, of our budget goes to mandated costs, and the 10% is the unmandated services, but that's the services that the public wants. We call them the people's mandates, because they don't want us to cut our libraries, they don't want us to close our parks, but that's the small 10% of my $1.5 billion budget that goes to those things. So as we go back and we start thinking, how are we formulating this plan? We've got to see the services that the county provided in the past, what we're providing now, what we're working currently with municipalities to do better, and what we're finding out is it's not an easy task, as each and every one of you knows, to come up with a plan. Thankfully, it appears that we'll be able to do that, and it's nice that we just have to come up with a plan. We might not even need to show the savings in the long run under the proposal from the budget. But it goes to show that what Albany did when they came up with this plan is just they sort of threw something at the dartboard without really thinking about what they were hitting. And so now we've got to fix it. That's fine. One of the problems that we dealt with in Erie County are special taxing districts. There's 10,500 special taxing districts is the latest estimate in New York State. There's roughly 1,044 in Erie County. We do not have 10% of the population of New York State. We do not have 10% of the tax base in New York State, but this community, for things that happened literally over a 50 to 60 year period, has 10% of the special taxing districts. So when we looked at what we can do in Erie County government, we figured, okay, how can we do things to help better coordinate and maybe eliminate some of those special taxing districts, or if not eliminate the special taxing districts, at least share the services. So a lot of these special taxing districts are in the fire service. As comptroller, we looked at the efficiencies associated with the fire service, and we made a report saying we have too many fire companies. Got criticized by the volunteer fire department saying that you shouldn't be saying that. Though they all admitted privately that you're right, there's too many volunteer fire companies in fire service, and we can probably consolidate some of those. And right now there's consolidation going on in Erie County. Now, I, as county executive, cannot mandate a consolidation of a fire district, but I can work through our emergency services office, which provides the vast majority of support to these volunteer fire districts, and say, how can we better create a volunteer fire district in your community using the emergency services as a platform? So that's what we're doing in the emergency services realm, is we're coming out and saying, we own the fire training academies, the main one that's used by all the volunteers, and we're starting to work with them and saying, okay, how can we bring you the volunteers together so it's saving you money? Because every time a volunteer fire department comes here, they do pay a small stipend associated with our volunteer training academy. So how can we bring volunteer fire departments together to get the same amount of training and reduce their costs, and the county still is able to get the same benefit of the bargain as it would have beforehand? So we're looking at that area because we have all these special taxing districts. If they're not going to disappear, what can we do to at least bring them together to save money for them, and in the end, hopefully save money for the greater good of the taxpayers of Erie County? And it's funny because when I tell the people in Erie County, you actually pay less in your taxes in 2014 than 1990. They all go apoplectic. They're like, no, I don't. Of course they don't, because it's the special taxing districts, it's the towns, it's the school districts' taxes that have increased exponentially as compared to the counties. So when I go out there and I say you pay less in taxes in 1990, no one believes it. But when you look at the county portion of it, you do. When you look at everything else that's grown, they haven't. And that's the problem, is that we're trying to find ways to come up with these savings, working with our municipalities that may not necessarily want to work in conjunction with the county. That's a problem. And I've talked to county executives during the sessions, and they've said, oh, we've got great relationships with the town. They're willing to work with us. I don't have great relationships with every town here. I'll be the first to admit that. We fight over just some basic things and basic services. And that makes it very difficult to come up with a plan if the town says, I don't want to work with you and just trying to figure out how we're going to fix this road, 0.88 miles of a road. I don't want to work with you on this, then how am I going to work with them with regards to coming up with an efficiency plan that we've got to send to New York State? Those are problems that we've been dealing with for some time in this community, and we're trying to find ways to alleviate that by saying we as a community can do better. So we looked at other services that we provide, and one of the things that was talked about yesterday, of course, was snow plowing contracts. Erie County just renegotiated a new snow plowing contract with our towns last year. We're going to put the savings that will materialize as a result of that snow plowing contract in our efficiency plan. Actually, I think the snow plowing contract savings just for Erie County alone is enough to equal the 1% of the tax levy. Because if we were to go out there and take over responsibility for snow plowing in Erie County that we have right now, it would be easily more than 2% of my tax levy, or 1% of my tax levy, which is approximately $2.5 million. And this is why. There are literally, in Erie County owns 1,200 centerline miles of roads. It's 2,400 lane miles of roads. This is an example of how Erie County did not do things right in the 40s and 50s and 60s. Towns don't own the vast majority of the roads in this community. The county does. If it was just one straight line road from Buffalo to the Pacific, you could go straight through Denver to San Francisco, and eventually your car would stall about 500 miles off the Pacific coast. That's ridiculous for a county to be owning that many miles of roads. And if we were to plow them all on our own, we'd have to hire probably another 75 employees and buy another $15 million worth of equipment. So we don't. We enter into a snow plowing agreement with our local towns, which we just renegotiated, and thankfully the renegotiation date was after the 2012 date, so we can include that as part of our efficiency plan. And just on that alone, because of the cost associated if the county was to go and do the roads, would be so substantial that we'll be able to come up with savings that is equal to or greater than actually the 1% of our tax levy. Now, the benefit of having the relationship in the snow plowing contract is we don't have to do it all. In the towns, they probably get a little bit more than it would cost them to do it on their own anyway, so they use this as a nice little way of balancing their budgets. And we had a nice little negotiation in which they didn't get exactly what they wanted. Actually, they didn't get anywhere close to what they wanted, but I'm glad that we were able to resolve it in the long run, because what ended up happening is they still got a good benefit for the bargain. And the county got a great benefit for the bargain as well, in looking at how we're coming about in creating more efficient government by not having to buy $12 million worth of equipment, not having to bring in 75 new laborers and mechanical equipment operators. And it's the kind of thing that when New York State came up with this plan, I don't know if they seriously thought that we're not doing these things in the first place. Maybe they did. Maybe they thought, oh, the towns and the counties, they don't work together. They're not doing anything together. We're going to force them to do things together. And what we've come up with in Erie County is a realization that we're already doing a lot of the things that they wanted us to do in the first place. So how do we take it to the next step? And we're doing that with other things. You talked about the medical examiner's office. Erie County provides medical examiner office for basically all of Western New York. And we have relationships with all the counties, as well as some of the municipalities, not only here, but in Pennsylvania, in which if something unfortunate should happen to an individual, they come to our medical examiner's office. It's not exciting. It's not juicy. It's not the kind of thing that you're going to go out and say, hey, I save taxpayers money through our medical examiner's office. How many taxpayers are going to care about that? Well, they might care about the money. They're not going to care about the medical examiner's office. And I think that goes to show is you got to think about the things that maybe aren't the most exciting elements of an efficiency plan. It's not the thing that you're going to run a platform for a political campaign on, but it is the kind of thing that will save money in the long run. Erie County worked in conjunction with the cities of Buffalo, Lackawanna, and Tonawanda to create one of the first land banks in New York State. We're trying to figure out if that will actually fit in the grand scheme of the efficiency plan. We think it will, because what the land banks are doing by coming together are putting dilapidated properties back on the tax rolls. And that in itself should be a savings in some ways, because if the taxes aren't being paid for a parcel of property because it's dilapidated, and now the land bank takes it over, what happens? Well, they can remediate the property and get it back on the tax rolls, so the owner of that property eventually will be paying taxes, which means the rest of the owners of properties in the community do not have to cover for the property that hasn't been paying for years. So it's another example of, it's a little different. It's maybe not exactly what New York State thought when they talk about efficiencies, but it's a perfect example of, we would not have a land bank in this community but for the county working with the three cities, as well as getting buy-in from our Association of Erie County Governments, which is mostly the town governments, and they sit on our board for the land bank. And each and every one of the towns plays a role, each of the cities plays a role. Once again, it's not the most exciting thing when you're talking about an efficiency plan, but it's the kind of thing that can save lots and lots of money in the long run through the addition of additional tax rolls on parcels that haven't been, in all likelihood, paying them for many, many years. I say this at the same time that the Erie County tax foreclosure sale is going on right now. So I'm hoping for a very nice tax foreclosure sale, but as part of that tax foreclosure sale, the land bank will be bidding on parcels of property to take them that we know probably won't be sold, so that we can reclaim them, remediate them, get them back on the tax rolls, so when we sell them, we're actually generating more revenue for the people of this community. We've looked and we're trying to figure out if a pilot program that we have right now in Erie County with New York State will qualify. We think it should, and it's our Medicaid Inspector General unit, which I see some of the members, including our Medicaid Inspector General, sitting in the back. We're working on a special pilot, which is different than the other Medicaid OMIG pilots that have been around for a number of years. And what we're doing is, rather than having the state come in and give a county money, which then maybe go to a consultant, we actually have full-time employees that are trained auditors that are going into the locations in our community and finding issues associated with Medicaid benefit fraud or just abuse. And then we report that back to the state. And the Medicaid Inspector General's office has looked at approximately, I think, $75 million worth of Medicaid receipts in the last few months alone, found things and turned that back over to the state OMIG to go after these individuals. And if there really is fraud, then it goes to the Attorney General's office. Now, that's not necessarily working with a town or village, but we are working with another government. And that government happens to be New York State. And if we find abuse, and if we find fraud locally and we turn it over to the state and then they determine, yes, there's fraud and abuse, so we're going to go after those individuals, that should be a savings that should go to our efficiency plan, because in the end, everyone saves. Because as we all know, not only is the county paying or the federal government paying, but there's a state portion as well. So it's a savings for all the people of New York, the more fraud we find. So I think that's another example of sort of thinking outside of what they really thought, which is, oh, we want a consolidation in efficiency plan through your villages and towns and cities. Well, this is something that can come up with substantial savings. We're just not doing it in conjunction with a town and a city, but we're doing it in conjunction with New York State. Shouldn't we get credit for it? So we're going to include that in our plan too. What's the worst thing that can happen? State comes back and say, nah, we don't like that plan. Well, we're going to fight for it. And if everything that I've heard from the Division of Budget is the case, I don't know how they're going to review all these plans. I really think if you put a comprehensive plan that is on paper, a very strong, solid plan, I think they're going to approve it, because the last thing they want to do is go line by line through all the plans for every municipality in our community and say, no, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, this is good. So as a result, we're putting in everything that we think is appropriate. Our biggest problem right now is not necessarily finding some of the efficiencies, it's truthfully getting buy-in from the local municipalities. And I don't know if that's the same elsewhere. And a lot of that just happens to be the natural fight in our community between town and villages as well as the county. I know in other communities it's not that. I've heard they've got great relationships with town leaders. We don't necessarily have that here. And it has nothing to do with politics, it just happens to be, we're the town X. And we don't like big bad county or big bad New York State coming in. Well, now New York State says we gotta work together to come up with an efficiency, and we're trying to navigate those waters, which aren't easy. So finding the savings as we go and look through the whole programs that we have, we can find those. It's more of an issue, who can we get sign-on from the towns and villages and cities in our communities? Because they don't always like working together. If we can do that, I feel very comfortable that we're gonna come up with a plan that not only meets the requirements of the 1% of the tax levy savings, I think in the long run, it's gonna create a better community. But once again, it's another example of, I think, Albany acting on an issue that, thinking that we're not doing it in the first place when we already were. And it's not the first time that's happened. So I wanna thank everybody. I hope you had a wonderful time here in Erie County, and I'll be open to any questions you may have after the panel speaks. Thanks.
Great job, Mark.